Morning all, let's have a look at the final round encounter between Magnus Carlsen playing white and the current world champion Vishy Anand. So Magnus, the highest rated FIDE rated player on the planet, and Vishy, who's been now becoming a long established world champion, and many see Magnus as a future world champion, but let's see what we can deduce from this game encounter. Magnus playing white kicks off with e4 and Vishy plays e5. After knight f3, knight c6, the classic Ruy Lopez, no messing around with sidelines here. And now knight f6, very solid response here, Berlin system. I think an anti kind of Berlin, avoiding a lot of theory now, d3, very popular move. But will black be able to equalise quite easily with this move d3, because fundamentally it looks a bit passive, although avoiding opening theory. We'll do a reference check actually in the second pass of this game to explore the main moves. Here black plays bishop c5. Okay, now white in this position plays what Ruy Lopez players would seem a little bit unusual. White plays knight c3, blocking in actually the c pawn, which usually in Ruy Lopez plays a role to play c3 for constructing a centre. I guess with bishop c5 there might be more effectiveness of a pin here with that bishop on c5 and potentially locked away on the queen side. And given that there's going to be a pin which could be more effective than usual, it's interesting also to be able to play knight d5. But there might be another idea behind knight c3 as well in this position based on d6, not just this pin. After d6, actually we do see an alternative idea, and apparently well, I think this is a very old idea, and one which technically you might think should give white a small advantage. White plays actually knight a4. I've played this kind of move myself once in the British Championship, and it didn't work out particularly well in my particular game, because sometimes the black knights are quite good if you try and get the bishop pair like this. But furthermore, after bishop b6, if black wanted to avoid with bishop b4, it doesn't really help c3, and then the bishop just gets chased back, and maybe b4 is useful for white, this construction possibly. So the bishop just dropped back here. But what black gets as in return, okay, loses the dark square bishop. So in return, black now has a free game for d5 potentially. This pin's not going to be as menacing without knight d5, but this a file might play a role later as well. So can the black knight survive against white's bishop pair? In this position, white tries to preserve the bishop pair. So the concept of the bishop pair is really to control squares of both colours, which is useful in many situations, like attacking the opponent's king in the endgame. If you can keep the bishop pair, then the knights, hopefully you'll be able to conquer the knights later. This next move helps preserve the light square bishop. It can crawl back into the position without getting exchanged off. In fact, black's next move, bishop d7, is indicating a willingness to exchange off immediately. So if the routine castling had been played here, and it's very interesting how these top GMs, they pick up on these little nuances and not routinely castling if there's a very functional move instead, which would really help things. Because if black doesn't routinely castle but plays bishop d7, then how can you preserve the light square bishop? It might be quite tricky after, say, knight a5. After bishop d7, knight a5, the bishop wouldn't have c4, it wouldn't have a4. So this move c3 instead of castling is yet another example in this tournament, really, of how these GMs they pick on the nuances of the position, and castling, even castling, is a generalization for king safety, which is often overwritten by other pressing priorities. So here, preserving the light square bishop, it crawls back safely now in position. So knight a5, we can play bishop c2. So knight e7, bishop c2. instead. Knight e7 gives scope for knight g6, and often, you know, knights on f6 and g6 are quite attacking on the king side, and here knight g6 is used. Okay. Now, interestingly, again, white doesn't castle yet again here, but plays another move which must reflect a more pressing concern in this position, in this particular position. The pressing concern might be to do with this pin to get rid of this knight, but it might just be something else. But we'll examine technically what is going on here, but in the second pass. But h3 was played, which the primary purpose does seem to be to get rid of black's use of the g4 square. In any case, now both players do castle. Okay, so there isn't the annoying pin with bishop g4. In fact, I think it can be safely said that this would be a very annoying pin, indeed, because h3, bishop f3. Let's look at it in the second pass. Pardon me. Let's look at that in the second pass. So we'll both sides castle. Now we see h6, depriving white of the g5 square. Complementary idea for both players. So rook e1, rook e8. They're both flattering each other now with similar types of moves. d4, putting pressure on e5, and black puts pressure on e4. So it's like a little dance going on here. Okay, with the logic being mirrored by both players. D takes e5, D takes e5. Exchange of queens. g3. Is Magnus going to grind this without the queens on? But look at black's use of the a file here. There's a bit of pressure on the a file and e4. Okay, both of these knights are kept out with these pawns here of all these squares. So knight d7 though betrays an idea that knight c5 could be useful, and if only this pawn was on c4, then black could even play knight e6 into d4. Okay, bishop e3, knight c5, not being concerned at all about white giving up the bishop pair. Knight d2, protecting e4, knight f8. Okay, the knight's coming to a nice central square, this one, so knight e6. This move f3 does mean now that these pieces are free to move that e4 is supported. h4, keeping the knight perhaps out of g5 here. Bishop b5, eyeing that sensitive d3 square. Is white going to be tempted to weaken d4 here by playing c4? White plays a3. Now black doubles, potentially doubles on the d file. Rook d7. Okay, we see b4 kicking knight, knight d3. Magnus keeping the bishop pair again. He doesn't want to take on d3 and give black a great position like that. Rook eb1 instead. And now potentially a4 and maybe b5 later. So black maybe sees a4 as a threat and stops it with bishop a4 in its tracks, and can use this a file for a blockade operation. And I remember looking at this game while it was being streamed live, and I really thought that black had a fantastic blockade on the position at various points. Here, this a-file blockade is going to make things difficult for white, and white's also, of course, given up now the bishop pair with this bishop exchange. What does that actually mean as well? Maybe, the light squares are also a bit weaker for white. So we'll see. Okay, b5 marking out at least c4. Is white going to break out with c4 and voluntarily undouble black's pawns? There could be other advantages gained from that dissolving of black's double pawns. h5, at least trying to lock down black's pawns on the king side. c5, an energetic move which gives scope to the knights now, and Magnus accepts that. He doesn't perhaps want c4, which black could really celebrate a lovely light square blockade with, say, c4, and then maybe even like this, and a3 is a victim. So here Magnus, he takes on c5, which does expose frontally b5, although it does make the knights more active now. So in fact this pawn is now dropping it. It is actually a pawn sacrifice. If we think about it, after b takes, it is technically a pawn sacrifice. So is there some ingeniousness about this pawn sack? Okay, we'll see. From the game continuation, rook takes b5, we see knight a4. Lovely blockade on a3, pressure on c3. That is a backward pawn on that semi-open file, which only black can use. So the knights have got nice blockade on c5 as well. It looks like a situation where Nimzovich would be proud of, these blockading knights. And that pawn sacrifice, it really is kind of prophylaxis play from white. And now we see a very, very passive looking move played from Magnus. Knight b1. He doesn't want to play c4. It might not even be technically possible here, but he plays knight b1, which seems horribly passive, but it does protect a3 as well as c3. Horribly passive knight though. f6. So is Magnus going to get an advantage from this position? c4. With c4 we still see c5 as a great blockade point for black, and in fact that's further reinforced with b6. And I just thought here it would be a draw. It's the last round, and at some point during this game Magnus was declared the winner of the tournament as well, so I presumed he would relax and just offer a draw. But what we saw instead here is Magnus still playing on now with great determination, really, even though he seems to be in a kind of passive position with an almighty blockade. He plays on with rook d5, so we've got this almighty blockade on c5, but we see rook c2, and now there were some mutterings as though white is up to something here. What is the plan that white's up to? Well, the rook can improve slightly here to go to b2 to attack b6, but what is the big deal about that here? Black makes preparation to protect b6, rook b2, and now black waits with king h7, basically saying, I've got this huge Nimzovichian blockade, prophylaxis, putting my position beyond all defeat, or so it seems. What are you going to do about it? These knights are also keeping the rook out of infiltration points, so how can white actually make progress here? I was intrigued to wonder why is Magnus playing on here. But we see another little plan in this position now. We see rook b4, and it emerges actually that possibly the move a4 is now on the cards, which might distract some resources away from either b6 or this 7th rank for rook d7 at some point. Here there might have been, I believe, we'll check this in the second class after g6, a technical opportunity for a4. I think it's at move 37. There was technically something picked up by the engines, because this has a slight weakness of the last move here, this check possibility on d7, and it might have been here in this position that a4 was good, but we'll check this in the second pass. As I say, Magnus instead, he sees g6 as an opportunity for another potentially useful and interesting plan to do with h6. There's potential frontal attack possibilities on h6. He actually takes that and plays rook d2, so the rook's changed its mind about the 7th or 8th ranks. The king might move, and maybe we've got something going on h6. Vishy plays h5, and we see now actually a pawn sack from Magnus now, knight c3. So what's going on here with this pawn sack? The knight's coming also to d5 potentially, with a threat of knight e7 check all of a sudden. So this rook coming to d5 was multi-purpose actually, with this pawn sack as well. So rook takes a3, knight d5, immediate threat. Blimey, has white got something from what was seemingly nothing going on? Okay, Vishy plays king f7, protecting e7, and now white's winning b6. Of course, it was a fork. It was actually a fork. Okay, b6. Is this really bad? Has the blockade been lifted all of a sudden? Knight takes b6. Okay, so white's still a pawn up. Is it a better pawn up than before? Well, when I was watching this game, I thought there's a problem with this. There's a problem here. This d4 square, although white has the classic monoxy bind structure, the weakness is d4 sometimes, and black compounds the knight into d4 now with knight b3. If he gets a knight into d4, surely that's going to be a pretty dangerous thing. But note, with knight b3, weakness of the last move, 7th rank, and Magnus takes that opportunity to get to the 7th rank here. But is it enough to have that rook on the 7th rank in the light of knight d4 now? And this rook can go on the 7th rank. So we see rook b7, and I really thought Magnus is pushing for a loss. Why didn't he just agree a draw earlier? He's had a fantastic tournament. He's already won the tournament. But I guess there's this idea that he wants to show he can beat the world champion in this tournament. But it's a very gritty position with black having very good pieces. And although he's a pawn up, it seems, to be honest, a token pawn up still, because black's activity is huge here with a knight on d4. So knight bd4 check. So he takes, and now this rook might be considering multiple checks, but is the king going to improve position? Well, Vishy actually plays, interestingly, the move king d8. King d8. And he's also got other possibilities, but I think this is a poison pawn here. Rook takes f3 because of rook a4, and then the black king's had it. So the rook has to maybe consider staying on this a file, and if white wants to get the rook off the a file, then white has to make an effort with king c1 to b2. And you might think, well, what about knight takes f3? I think this is a tricky position now, actually, and we need to check this in the second pass, because it seems also knight takes f3 might even promise rook d6, but there's always knight d5. So, but is knight f3 at all tempting? King d8. I mean, it's a mysterious move to play, maybe, but I think that there must be underlying technical reasons why, well, knight f3 in particular is unplayable here, and we'll see that in the second pass. So king d8, seeing what white will do. Okay, so in this position, white actually plays a check and then goes back. So who wants a draw now? Do both players want a draw? Vishy plays king d8. It's up to Magnus to repeat or not, and he kind of refuses the repetition. He plays knight d5. Okay, now with knight d5, the rooks are connected again and may line up like this, check and then check. So here, Vishy plays check, check, and he's not going along with, well, what can he actually do here? If he plays check and check and king b2, we need to examine that, if that's actually possible. But it seems it's ruled out for some technical reason, which we'll explore in the second pass. White plays actually rook b2, so an exchange of rooks, and now black has two pawns to choose from, and takes on f3 finally, and now go to g5. So black is still, after all this, a pawn down. Check, check. Two pawns down. Pardon me, black wasn't a pawn down there. This is a long game. Sorry. Black at the moment is a pawn down, and now is not a pawn down. Okay, but after check, check, now is a pawn down again. Pardon me. Rook a6, and I think Magnus has really, he hasn't got an advantage of, it's a token extra pawn, because black's again got great activity. He's got pressure on e4. He's got multiple check options. So what we see is check, king c5, and Magnus finally now conceding a draw by repetition. I think he was left frustrated by this game, that he couldn't grind out an advantage. There's a lot of technical nitty-gritty going on behind the scenes. It wasn't a simple blockade then scenario. There were dynamic options for white which Magnus used up, but they didn't really get that far. So let's see again in set and pass this game. It shows Vishy's a hard nut to crack as well. He might be significantly lower FIDE rated than Magnus. Magnus has got the all-time highest FIDE rating now. He was 2848 apparently at the start of this game, so he dropped a few points just by drawing with the world champion. But here it's dead level. Let's just check this out. If rook b5, king c6, taking here, what would happen here? Multiple checks, or just taking on g3? Taking on g3. The engine thinks we've reached 000. Interestingly, and also black now has this passed h pawn, so that's starting to get a bit dangerous, surely. And the possibility of rook g4 attacking e4. So let's go back. Did white actually have an advantage? From an engine point of view, it would be interesting here. Did white have an advantage in this position? The engine actually likes knight a4, and I wonder, is bishop g5 just far too stodgy? What would happen here? In fact, a6, b5, h6, just kicking out immediately, and there's probably no big deal about knight d5 here. Queen just retreats. It's a position. Okay, it's a different way of playing it. So we see knight a4. Okay, bishop b6. If bishop b4, then that chase mentioned. Let's have a quick look at that. Does that give white anything? Not particularly. It's okay, white's still got the option of taking, but can delay it for a little bit if he wants. If he wants that bishop at all. Okay, I think actually it's reference check time, not engine analysis time. So in this position, what is the verdict on d3? White castling is the most popular move. Now d3 in this position, with 3,398 games, is the second most popular. And Anand himself has played it before, Carlsen before this game, Svidler, Morozevich, the best players using this. And Svidler is one of the most frequent players using this d3 method. For castles, it's vastly more popular to castle and invite knight e4. So after castling, knight e4 is a 54.2% score on my database. It's not particularly ambitious really. So d3 is trying to be more ambitious. It's actually got a 59.6% score, slightly more than castling d3 in this position. And what we saw, bishop c5, the most popular apparently is d6, 1858 games, but bishop c5 1,077 games, with Topalov, Kramnik, Anand, Ivanchuk playing bishop c5 before. d6 has been played by Kasparov, Anand, Ivanchuk, Topalov as well. Okay, so in the game we saw bishop c5. Let's go back to that reference. And here there are two main moves, castling or c3. A third move, bishop c6, with 180 games. 259 games for c3, Magnus's choice. Castling 456. So c3 was chosen in the game. Pardon me. c3 wasn't chosen in the game. It was knight c3 in this position. That's actually the fourth most popular move in this position with 74 games. Carlsen, Svidler, Axiev, Short have played knight c3. Nigel was saying he's played this before. Knight b1 to c3 in this position. It's got only a 52% score. Taking on c6 has got actually the most promising score, 63.1%. It's been played by Anand before, Topalov, Ivanchuk, Svidler. c3 in this position, 57.5% score, Anand, Vajabov, Liko, Svidler. The top move is just castling, Anand, Liko, Svidler, Jakovenko. So okay, knight 1 to c3 was played here. Black's main options are d6, top one, castling, second one. What was actually played? d6. And now the top move apparently in this position is bishop g5, second is castling, third is h3. We see knight a4. So hang on, where down the list was knight a4? Pardon me? That was the fourth down the list after h3. So we see knight a4 with 27 games. Kazmadanov has played that before. Knight a4, 27 games. h3, 31 games. Castling, 33 games. The most popular bishop g5 is actually 107 games. So knight a4. Bishop going to b6 is the most popular. Only 2 games with bishop b4, 25 with just going to b6. Okay, white taking immediately. Now taking immediately is the second most popular move actually. C3 in this position is the most popular move, in fact. So Magnus taking on b6 is not the most frequent choice. c3 here. Svidler, Hari Krishna, Efemenko have played c3 before. Taking on b6, Short, Annotated, Ehrenberg have played this before. Knight takes immediately. Now we see c3. That is actually, I think, the most popular move now, c3. So after bishop d7, the idea of 2 games, it seems, is bishop to a4. It's been seen before. Short has played this before. Nigel Short. Amanatov, he's played all this before. So knight e7. Now we're out of these reference games here. Black's castled before in 2 games. So a Short against the Aronian game in 2004 was a draw with Aronian castling here. The amount of Ulco game was a win with Black castling, but in both cases the bishop got tucked on c2. So away with our reference database now onto engine view. So h3, was there a big deal here? There's some confusion about why h3 was necessary. If we castle, is bishop g4 really a threat? It doesn't seem to be, actually. It doesn't seem to be at all. It might actually be a weak move. Just h3. Yes, I think it's just a weak move here. If bishop h5, we can consider g4 surely. Or not? No. If we play g4, Black's better with knight g4. It's too dangerous, this position. There's knight h4 to come. There's queen f6. So say king g2. There's knight h4 immediately winning. So it's not actually a threat. The bishop can actually go there. But here d4, and white should be a little bit better. So I'm not really sure, actually, if h3 is strictly necessary. An engine point of view, castling is okay, or bishop e3. h3 might not be strictly necessary. Both sides castle. h6. Okay, it's a roughly equal position here. Even though white has bishop here, you might think there's something, but okay, d5 or de. Carlsen chooses d takes e5, and it does seem a bit dry, this position. But is it a position where Magnus can grind out the endgame? He's developing a huge reputation for being able to do that. But if anything, now after knight d2, it seems the engine actually likes black after knight d3, if anything. Well, knight comes to d3 soon anyway. As though black's doing okay here. Actually, coming back to this rook d7 here, on the post-mortem analysis video, where Vishy's talking about the game, he attributes actually his blundering during the tournament, and rook d7 is a big blunder, believe it or not. This wasn't actually supposed to be the course of the game. It has a slight weakness of the last move, and that is blocking out the knight from retreating to d7. So with the knight being actually forced virtually to go to d3 now after b4, Magnus is pouncing on that. And you might think, well, the knight's quite pretty there. The problem is it can be potentially rounded up with in the game here, after rook eb1, the b2 square has been taken away. If we have moves like a4, this bishop protecting it is a bit loose, and then later, well, we'll see now that the bishop has to do something about a4. So we see bishop a4, but now after Magnus, he loses the bishop pair, but now white has a plan like this to surround the knight. It hasn't got any retreat square because the b4 taking away c5, g3 is taken away f4. So this is now a big threat, and this wasn't an intended continuation at all of Vishy Anand. It's important to have empathy for these games, and it's great to have access to their post-mortems of the games to be able to get the true empathy, but this wasn't actually a natural course intended at all from Vishy. This knight's almost trapped. And just to demonstrate that, let's just demonstrate that. Say we give black here a token move to demonstrate how the knight could be potentially trapped. Say king h7, a token move, king e8, king e2, king g8. Now the move knight c4 would take away b2. Unless black does b5 to kick it, rook d3 is now a very serious threat. So that's one way, for example, that the knight could be trapped. But the king coming to e2 is obviously part of that. So there are big concerns about the knight on d3. Hence this pawn sack, which okay, it's like a rescue mission for the knight, really. We see b5 first, and now this coming up with rook a6 to be able to potentially also, I think, defend the knight. What is white actually threatening here? So let's add back a bit here. White actually might be threatening to do something in this position. So let's see, knight b3, then rook d1. Simply knight b3 and then rook d1 is a major problem here. Knight b3, rook d1. So the knight's a big problem here. So the rook coming back to a6 is also less of a mystery now. It's to do with this knight here. So now knight b3 can be answered with rook. Let's go with rook c6 in this position, where the knight's actually justified at stopping c1, so c3 is under fire. So okay, so she's having to really deal with this knight on d3. In the game here, actually, it wasn't the move knight b3. This is actually, which may be an interesting move, knight b3, but actually the move h5 was played. Sorry, knight b3, rook c6 is not an interesting move, but h5. So why not rook c6 here, you might ask, in light of the other one. Rook c6, attacking the c3, c4, or rook b3. This is a very interesting move, c4 now in this position. And if take something, we have b5 as a strong idea to just trap the rook nearly. Or if rook cd6, now knight takes c4, and this is a big problem for black. It's losing the exchange here. So the knight is being kept on d2 because of this c4 resource, it seems. So that's something interesting as well. So h5, instead. And yeah, black technically from an engine point of view, even after this accidental forced entry on d3, black is better, but c5 continues like the rescue mission plan for the knight. Is it strictly necessary here to do this pawn sack? Let's go with rook d8 as an example. So knight b3, and now rook d1 seems a bit of a menace. Rook c6, bishop d2, b6. It is a big question if this knight, you know, if it is such a problem that white has to play knight c1, then that's the end of black's issues. Surely black should be okay again. Okay, so yeah, is it a strength or a weakness, this knight? But in the game, yeah, this reaction to play c5 is a pretty radical thing. And now technically the engine likes white, of course, but Vishy talks about his fortress, which is, you know, blockade position, and being able to maintain it. And it does look to me still like a very good fortress or blockade, whatever terminology you would like to use here. But black seems to have, at the moment, a difficult to penetrate position. But there is something coming up tactically, which was spotted here, g6. If we give this some depth, when I was checking on ChessBomb, the move a4 was interesting, but hg is also interesting. Before this, however, if we just rewind it here, there's no real problem at the moment for black. Okay, so we see g6. Maybe the idea is to activate the king, though, in the endgame, which worked out quite well. The king was able to be quite useful and interesting in the endgame, but it's like slight cost here tactically. This move a4 was coming up as a strong move on more powerful hardware here to play a4, believe it or not. If we can just quickly just examine this idea to try and get to the 7th. So say black just takes this as an example. Knight c3 is the problem, and now white is developing an even better position. And now it seems after f4 actually there's big pressure here for black. This is starting to be a high pressure situation. I'm not sure if the fortress is holding. Let's go with this h4. So the threat now, what is white actually threatening here? Just rook takes e5 actually is the threat. So knight f4. If the fortress has been torn apart here basically. So that can white's better here. That can stem from a4 after this move g6. This is interesting to consider. But h takes g6 is liked as well in this position at this depth anyway. Not sure on a4. Okay, I mean they're becoming about the same. It's pretty deep stuff. So hg seems a good move as well. It fragments black's pawns. Now the rook coming back to d2 is quite an accurate move. It seems. It's what is the actual threat? Is it to come to h2? King f1, king f1, then potentially. Okay, what is the idea of rook d2? Let's try and work this out. Is it? Let's say black plays rook a7, king f2. Let's put as a token move to go back here. It's difficult to ascertain actually. f4 in this position. This does look dangerous. White seems better than before, but okay, f5, and now rook h1. Okay, this is potentially dangerous in variations, as we can intuitively think about the h6 pawn as a weakness here, but this sort of stuff demonstrates that. Okay, so rook d2, yeah, I thought just intuitively it's to do with this h6 pawn. So we see h5 from Vishy. So we've now got a positional threat potentially of h4 to undermine f4. Maybe the rook can come and support h4 at some point. So we see knight c3 offering a3 here. So that really sharpens things up. Did white have to play knight c3? Let's imagine king f2, rook a7, just to play rook h7 and h4 potentially. King f7. Why not rook h7 out of interest? Knight c3 here. Okay, the rook is tying down the knight on b1 really. Okay, so if white gets that position with a4, this is no good here. On only h4 here, okay, we can just take. I think black's overly committed in this position. He's got a weakness on b6 as well, glaring weakness on b6. That's pretty nasty. So okay, so let's go back. So black's keeping his rook on tying down this knight, it seems, but the knight goes anyway, sacking the pawn to get knight d5 in. So we see rook takes a3, knight d5. Now there's pressure on b6. So white's potentially going to get the pawn back soon, and the rook's very nice for stopping all the second row checks as well. So that was dual purpose, not just potentially for h6 earlier. Okay, but now b6 can be a clear target without any issues from black. So king f7, we see knight takes b6, regaining material, which leads to equality though, taking like that. I mean, is there any other better moves? Let's say rook db2, not being too hasty to win material. Sometimes that works. Again, it's a tricky kind of fortress position, actually. I don't think there is a particularly clear white plan here. Even with the very nice looking knight on d5, this is a hard to increase the advantage, I think, here. So the way Magnus played it, I think, well, I believe he thought at least he couldn't lose, but this is starting to be dangerous with black having a nice knight now, and it getting a bit sort of like loose pieces. There's a threat now of rook takes b6 surely for king d7 after this. Now rook takes b6 is threatened. The rook has to move. If it did go to the other side of the board, okay, that's not a big deal. If it goes to b7 or h7 here, apparently it's about the same thing. So it goes to b7, and then this knight's coming to d4 now. It's taken. I don't think it can be tolerated. In fact, there's a tactic. If king d2 is actually a tactical idea, rook takes e3, and white has to bail out for a draw here with knight d5. It seems if he takes here, knight c2 check, winning that rook. Okay, so this is starting to get a little bit dangerous. White has to take really. So king d1, and we see now Vishy was in postmortem very proud of this next move, king d8. So let's see what is the actual genius of king d8. What is white actually threatening? Is it if white's given another move, knight d5, then rook b8, and the other one joining in? So how does king d8 address, for example, that threat? If on king d8 here, knight d5 in this position. Let's have a look at knight. I think Vishy was indicating he was satisfied all his pieces are in good places at the moment. And there was a question in the first pass about knight takes f3. How does this fail? Knight takes f3. I think just knight d5, and knight really hasn't done anything for black, and now there's a threat of rook b8, and this is actually potentially totally winning for white. In fact, this would be a clear blunder, even though restoring material equality. I think black's busted here. threats here, actually not rook b8 but rook h7 to play rook b8 mate. So the black king is in trouble, big trouble in this position. So let's give an example. Check. Okay, running out checks is not a good sign. Rook h7 here. If the other rook comes to the 7th, it's going to be quite pretty soon. Well, that's offering the exchange. It just looks like a disaster. So at least Vishy's move is not knight takes f3. That is a total disaster here in this position to play knight takes f3. And on rook takes f3, I think that's equally a disaster for rook a4. Just coming in there for anything mate. And I think this is a line which, okay, maybe let's see what's going on here. Check, knight c5. Now there's rook d8 as a defense here, so possibly black could survive this at this depth. Anyway, it seems as though this might be okay. At least with white only having one rook here, there's less chance of being mated on the spot. So this king d8 is an interesting move. It just keeps the knight intact and the rook on the a file, guarding that a file, and this one attacking c4. So I think Vishy had determined his pieces were already on good squares, so why displace them? And in fact, his king's also in danger. So king d8, very interesting move. Let's see, for example, if white casually played rook h7 here as an example, then we can do checks. Now possibly even take here to come back, and this should be fine. These checks are fine. That just demonstrates that white can't really is having some difficulties in this position. So after king d8, Magnus he plays a check first, puts the king, and then the king comes back, and now decides on knight d5, again trying for, there does seem to be threats of rook h7, rook b8 here, but it's black's turn for a check. Okay, throws in another check, and okay, can white get out of the checks? Because otherwise then white would be threatening, if white had another move, rook f7, rook g7, rook h7, just to threaten rook b8 is really dangerous. But so can black keep the balance here? Let's go with check here, taking the c4 pawn. Check. Now this ending, okay, is safer for the black king. Clearly black's not getting mated just yet. In this position it should be okay, I think. After f5, black should be able to survive this, surely. This position, it's less than half pawn advantage. As an example, I think it should be okay. It should be tenable. So okay, we see this decision from Magnus, which is again is very committal. That's why I think it's important to mention maybe that he's relinquishing the power of both rooks mating black king here by playing rook b2. So now it is panning out into a draw, and I think now it's becoming clearer. It's likely to be a draw. So knight g5, and I think this carries the threat of knight takes e4 here potentially, with some drawing chances of just wiping out all of white's pawns. Although that's not really picked up on here. If rook b7, for example, I think they mention in post-mortem knight e4, and maybe it's not liked here. No, it's not liked here at all by the engine. Actually, this doesn't seem to be very good if the king comes to e6. Not this particular position. It seems that doesn't work. So anyway, in the game we see check, check. I think it might be around here where knight takes e4 might start to be threatened in this position. Yes, because the king's on d5, that's the key difference. It's undermining d5, making it work a lot better. Knight takes e4, it's an undermining threat now. So Magnus plays knight takes f6, protecting his e4 pawn, and then it's really panning out now into a drawing scenario. Okay, and with this draw, Magnus is he's had a fantastic tournament. Credit to Vishy for, okay, he accidentally had to play a pawn sack, it seems, to get his knight, to make sure his knight was safe. He was panicking about his knight, but it was a great fortress anyway, as it turned out, and it wasn't so clear cut if the knight on d3 was good or bad. Okay, so yeah, very interesting game, very complex. And again, congratulations to Magnus for having, he's going to have the highest FIDE rating in chess history on the published January list coming up next year. So that'll be a happy new year for Magnus to kick off with that highest ever rating. Comments or questions on YouTube? Thanks very much.